Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a pretty big one.
Mm.
Humanity's relationship with our planet. We've got this really comprehensive exploration. It's our source material for today. And, well, our mission is pretty simple. We want to pull out the key insights about how we relate to the Earth, look at the moral and ethical angles,
Yeah.
basically give you a solid understanding without getting, lost in all the details.
Yeah, and this source is, well, it's vast. But what immediately jumped out at me was this really powerful call, a call for us to rethink our whole place in the world.
Rethink how?
It's all about recognizing how deeply connected everything is, and why we urgently need to step up, really take responsibility for the home we all share. Think of it less like a planet with resources just for us, and more like this massive, intricate web where everything we do has ripple effects everywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I first saw the sheer scale of this material, I was honestly just buzzing with curiosity. Like, what core ideas can we actually unpack here?
Right.
Okay, so let's dive right in. There's this striking image right at the start.
Mm-hmm.
The Earth as our sister and mother.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't some New Age thing, is it? It comes straight from Saint Francis of Assisi.
Yeah.
That beautiful song, Laudato Si, mi signore, praise be to you, my Lord.
Exactly.
What's so powerful about that, for me anyway, is how it immediately shifts your perspective.
It really does. And what's fascinating is how it establishes this really personal connection from the get-go, calling the Earth a sister with whom we share our life, and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us.
Yeah.
It just encourages you to see the planet not just as, resources, but as something you have a fundamental bond with, almost familial.
Like family.
Right. And it makes you think twice about how you treat a family member, doesn't
It
it?
definitely does. And, well, the text says, this sister, the Earth, is now crying out. Why? Because of the harm we've inflicted.
Yeah.
Irresponsibly using, and let's be honest, abusing the gifts we've been given.
It paints a picture of us acting like we just have the right to take whatever we want. Consequences, don't worry about them.
Like we own the place.
Exactly. Like we've forgotten we're guests here, not the landlords. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the text makes a really compelling argument. It says the environmental problems we see, the sick soil, polluted water, dirty air, these aren't just isolated things.
Right.
They're actually a reflection of something deeper going on inside us, inside human hearts that are, as it puts it, wounded by sin.
So an internal problem manifesting externally.
Precisely. It suggests it's not just about our actions outside. It's about an internal imbalance that shows up in how we treat the world.
There's also this really grounding point, isn't there? A simple reminder of our fundamental connection.
Yeah, the dust of the earth idea.
Exactly. We are literally made of it. Our bodies are its elements. We breathe its air, rely on its water.
It's easy to forget how physically dependent we are, isn't it? It's like baked into our DNA. And building on that, the text presents this really powerful idea, maybe a bit uncomfortable,
Go on.
that the earth itself is among the most abandoned and maltreated of our poor. It even says it's groaning in travail.
Wow. That elevates things, doesn't it?
It really does. It frames the environmental crisis beyond just ecology. It becomes a fundamental issue of social justice, linking the planet's well-being directly to the well-being of the most vulnerable people.
So who are we really hurting with our actions?
That's the question it forces you to ask.
Okay, the text then takes us through some historical and papal perspectives on this whole relationship. It points to St. John Paul II. He was increasingly concerned about this trend of seeing the environment purely as something for us to use and consume right now. He even called for a global ecological conversion. What exactly did he mean by that?
Well, it wasn't just about recycling more or, changing light bulbs.
Right.
Global ecological conversion for him meant a much deeper shift. A shift in our values, our thinking, our behavior. He really emphasized the need to safeguard the moral conditions for an authentic human ecology. Recognizing that environmental destruction isn't just a technical problem you solve with better tech, it's a moral failing, rooted in how we understand human dignity and our place in the world.
So harming the environment is linked to devaluing human life itself.
That's exactly how he saw it, intrinsically linked.
And he wasn't talking about small tweaks, was he? He called for some pretty major changes.
Oh, yeah. Profound changes, he said, in lifestyles, models of production, consumption, even the established structures of power.
That sounds like a complete overhaul.
Pretty much. And his successor, Benedict XVI, he kind of continued this line of thought. He proposed that we need to tackle the structural causes of the economic problems, the dysfunctions in the world economy, and fix the models of growth which have proved incapable of ensuring respect for the environment. He stressed, you can't look at environmental issues in isolation. They're woven into our economic and social systems.
Yeah, he talked about the book of nature being one and indivisible, didn't he?
Exactly, encompassing everything from the physical environment to life itself,
Hmm.
even touching on things like sexuality, family, social relationships.
All connected.
It's all connected in his view. And Benedict pointed to what he saw as a core underlying issue.
Which was?
This idea that society has lost its grounding in, well, indisputable truths, leading to this concept of limitless human freedom.
Yeah.
His argument basically is that when we forget we're not the ultimate authority, when we don't recognize something greater than ourselves, we inevitably end up misusing creation, seeing it as nothing more than our personal property to exploit, just for our own benefit.
Okay. The text then moves into the ethical and spiritual dimensions more directly. It brings in Patriarch Bartholomew. He spoke very powerfully, didn't he, about the need for us to repent for the harm we've caused the planet, acknowledging our personal roles in its disfigurement and destruction.
Disfigurement. That's a strong word.
It really is.
Yeah. Bartholomew's contribution is incredibly impactful because he explicitly calls actions that damage the environment, like destroying biodiversity, degrading the earth through climate change, deforestation, polluting air and water, he calls them sins.
Sins, not just mistakes or policy failures.
Exactly. That immediately reframes these issues. They're not just policy problems or economic challenges. They become fundamental ethical and spiritual failures. It forces us to confront our moral responsibility to the planet.
And he challenges us to look beyond just technology for answers, right?
Absolutely. He argues the roots of our environmental problems lie deep in our ethics, our spirituality, demanding a fundamental change of humanity.
So what kind of change?
He calls for a real shift, from focusing on what we can consume to what we can sacrifice, from greed to generosity, from wastefulness to sharing.
That's a profound shift.
It is, and what's particularly profound is his description of the world as a sacrament of communion.
Sacrament of communion.
Yeah, suggesting it's a way for us to connect and share, not just with each other globally, but also with God. He proposes that the divine and the human meet in the slightest detail of God's creation, even in, like, the last speck of dust of our planet.
Wow. A reminder that the sacred is everywhere.
Exactly.
Okay, so then the text turns to Saint Francis of Assisi, an inspiring example, often called the patron saint of ecology. He's presented as someone who really lived out this care for the vulnerable and embraced what the text calls integral ecology with joy and authenticity.
Right.
What does integral ecology actually mean in his context?
Well, for St. Francis, it wasn't just about protecting trees and animals. It was deeply tied to his concern for the poor, the marginalized. He lived in this remarkable harmony with God, with other people, with nature, even within himself.
Harmony.
Yeah. And the text emphasizes that for him, caring for nature, seeking justice for the poor, engaging with society, finding inner peace, these were all inseparable parts of a whole.
So you couldn't have one without the others.
Exactly. You couldn't just be an environmentalist without caring about poverty or vice versa. It was all integrated.
And it highlights how Francis looked at the world differently, not just with a scientific or economic eye.
Right. He had this incredible sense of awe and wonder, seeing every creature not just as something to be used, but as a brother or a sister.
Brother, sun, sister, moon.
Precisely. He refused to just treat the world around him as an object, something to control and exploit. And crucially, the text points out that St. Francis, through his deep understanding of Scripture, saw nature as a magnificent book in which God speaks to us.
A book?
Yeah. He found glimpses of divine beauty and goodness everywhere in creation, which underscores the importance of, contemplation, of really paying attention and reverencing the world.
See more than just the physical stuff, seeing the story it tells. Okay, now the text seems to shift gears a bit. A more direct look at the present ecological crisis. It kicks off by noting this phenomenon called rapidification.
Ah, yes, rapidification.
The incredibly fast pace of change we're seeing now compared to the much, much slower rhythm of biological evolution.
Yeah, this idea is key, really key to understanding why there's such urgency around environmental issues. The speed at which human activity has transformed the planet, it's just far outpacing nature's ability to adapt.
Right.
And often the goals driving this rapid change, they aren't necessarily aligned with the long-term well-being of people or the planet.
It's like we're driving way too fast without looking at the road.
That's a good way to
Yeah.
put it, exactly.
So the text then zooms in on specific problems, starting with water.
Water.
It highlights how developed countries consume water at unsustainable rates, the huge amounts we waste, and the really devastating consequences when demand outstrips supply.
Yeah, especially in places like Africa where it disproportionately hits the poor the hardest.
And it's not just about quantity, is it? It's quality, too.
Absolutely. What's particularly alarming is the declining quality of water available to those who are already vulnerable, leading to widespread illness, even death.
That's terrible.
And the text also raises a red flag about this increasing trend of privatizing water, turning something fundamental to life into just another commodity, bought and sold on the market.
Which raises that question. Is water a right or a privilege?
Exactly.
And this discussion on water scarcity leads to a pretty stark prediction, doesn't it?
It does. The potential for rising food costs, even conflicts in the future. Some experts warning of severe shortages within just a few decades.
It really shows how interconnected everything is. Water affects everything.
Absolutely. And from water, the text moves pretty naturally to the equally critical issue of loss of biodiversity.
Right. Losing species.
Yeah. It emphasizes that our relentless exploitation of Earth's resources, often driven by short-term economic gains, it's causing extinctions, species that could actually be vital for our future.
How so?
Well, they might hold keys to new medicines or play crucial roles we don't even fully understand yet in our ecosystems.
And it makes the point that we tend to notice the big animals disappearing, right?
Yeah.
The charismatic ones. But the health of our ecosystems also relies on this vast, often unseen network. Fungi, algae, insects.
The little guys.
The little guys.
Yeah.
And our activities, often fueled by business interests and consumerism, are making our planet less diverse and ultimately less resilient.
The text seems quite critical of how we assess the impact of big projects.
It is. It criticizes the lack of thorough studies on how human projects impact biodiversity, almost as if losing species is seen as just an acceptable cost of progress.
An insignificant cost.
Right. It highlights how infrastructure development, commercial activities, they often just ignore natural reproductive cycles, destroy crucial habitats, pushing more and more species towards the
And even with protected areas, we need to do more. Much more. The text stresses we need to pay way closer attention to incredibly biodiverse regions, like the Amazon, the Congo basins, and look at the threats from large-scale monoculture plantations, destructive ocean practices like overfishing, pollution. It's devastating coral reefs.
Right.
The recurring theme here is just interconnectedness of all living things. The text argues that every creature has value in itself and within the larger web of life, and investing more in understanding these intricate ecosystems is absolutely essential for any real conservation.
Okay, so shifting focus a bit, beyond just the environment itself, the text then addresses the decline in the quality of human life and the breakdown of society. It points to the often unhealthy growth of our cities, plagued by pollution, noise, lack of green spaces, social isolation.
Yeah, suggesting that we as humans aren't really meant to live so disconnected from the natural world.
And it raises some interesting points about the digital world, too.
It does, suggesting that the constant media presence, the online interactions, they might actually be hindering our ability to develop wisdom, to think deeply, to foster genuine relationships.
Sacrificing real connection for superficial clicks.
That's the concern, yeah. That we're trading depth for breadth, maybe?
The text also shines a light on how environmental degradation often goes hand in hand with social inequality.
Definitely. Leading to increased violence, crime, and the displacement of people, environmental refugees forced to leave their homes because of environmental changes.
And then there's the burden of debt, foreign debt, and something called ecological debt.
Right.
What exactly is ecological debt?
Well, in this context, it's the idea that wealthier nations, through their history and ongoing exploitation of resources and pollution, they've basically accumulated a debt to poorer nations.
A debt.
Yeah, because those poorer nations are often the most affected by the environmental consequences. It's a debt that goes beyond just money. It's measured in environmental damage, lost potential for sustainable development.
I see. So, in the face of all this, the water crisis, biodiversity loss, social breakdown, this ecological debt, the text expresses concern over the weak responses we've seen.
Yeah, it's quite critical. It criticizes the lack of strong global commitment, the often ineffective international political responses. easily swayed by powerful tech and financial interests.
Lots of talk, not enough action.
That's the sense you get. Superficial rhetoric instead of real, meaningful change. It really underscores this fundamental link between environmental damage and the erosion of our human and ethical values.
Suggesting we're reaching a critical point.
A breaking point, perhaps, evidenced by more frequent natural disasters, the instability in our social and financial systems.
Okay, so chapter 2 takes a different tack. It moves into the gospel of creation, exploring why the core beliefs of many faiths are actually really relevant to understanding and maybe addressing the ecological crisis.
Right. It starts by looking at the wisdom in biblical accounts, beginning with the creation of humanity in God's image. Genesis, yes, which emphasizes the inherent dignity of every person and our fundamental connection to God, to each other, and to the earth itself.
And the fracturing of these relationships that's seen as sin.
Exactly. As distorting the original mandate given to humanity to exercise dominion over the earth, the harmony that Saint Francis lived is presented as a way of healing that original brokenness, restoring those vital connections.
And the text clarifies this idea of dominion, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not a license to exploit.
Not at all. It's presented as a responsibility to till and keep the garden of the world, implying a relationship of care, of stewardship.
Stewardship, not ownership.
Precisely. It emphasizes that ultimately the earth is the Lord's, rejecting any idea that we have absolute ownership.
And it points to specific laws and teachings in the Bible that promote respect for nature.
Yeah, even including things like giving animals rest on the Sabbath. It stresses that the biblical worldview doesn't support a selfish, destructive view of humanity's place, what it calls a tyrannical anthropocentrism.
So putting humans at the center in a way that harms everything else.
Right, a distorted view. The text also emphasizes the intrinsic value of other living beings in God's eyes. It even quotes the Catechism, criticizing the view that other creatures exist solely to serve human needs.
And the story of Cain and Abel.
Used as an illustration, the first murder shows how disregarding our relationship with both our neighbor and the earth. It just devastates all our relationships.
And Noah. The Sabbath laws.
Highlighted as examples of this deep interconnectedness. Renewal through respecting nature's rhythms, the Sabbath, the sabbatical year, the Jubilee, and then there's the constant praise of God, the Creator, in the Psalms, the prophetic writings talking about God's power and tenderness towards all creation. It all adds to this richer perspective.
The experience of the Babylonian captivity is also mentioned.
As a reminder, yeah, that even in crisis, faith in God's creative power offers hope. And it cautions against a spirituality that loses sight of God as the ultimate creator, because that can lead to worshiping earthly powers, mistreating the natural world.
Okay. The chapter then delves into the mystery of the universe, emphasizing that creation is broader than just nature.
Right. It encompasses God's loving plan, where every single creature has its own inherent value and purpose within this larger design. It's a contrast to a purely mechanistic view. The universe is just random parts.
And the act of creation itself is described as an act of love.
Free choice and love by God, yes. Divine love is the fundamental driving force behind everything. The text argues the Judeo-Christian tradition actually helped demythologize nature, shifting focus towards human responsibility while still recognizing the cosmos' incredible grandeur.
Okay, the universe is presented as open and interconnected.
Yes, systems constantly interacting, ultimately open to God's transcendence. Faith, the text suggests, lets us interpret the deeper meaning and beauty underneath it all. It also emphasizes that even from the bad things we do, God can ultimately bring good, working with our willingness.
And it highlights the unique place of humans.
It does. Our capacities for reason, dialogue, invention, suggesting a special direct action of God in our emergence. And it points to the ultimate destiny of the entire universe in the fullness of God through the risen Christ, which gives us another powerful reason to reject exploiting the rest of creation.
Right. Okay, moving on. The chapter explores the message of each creature in the harmony of creation.
Yeah, underscoring that every single creature, in its own way, has a purpose, reflects God's love. Nature itself becomes a constant form of revelation, inviting us to contemplate, to learn from the world around us.
And the interconnectedness of all creatures is stressed again.
Very much so. citing figures like St. Thomas Aquinas, who noted that the sheer variety in creation actually reflects the multifaceted nature of divine goodness. The Catechism also stresses how all beings are interdependent.
And Saint Francis's hymn comes back here.
As a perfect expression of this, seeing God reflected in everything can move our hearts to praise in unity with the whole created order.
That concept of a universal communion is then introduced.
Right. Built on the idea that ultimately everything created belongs to God. And we are all linked by unseen bonds, one vast universal family.
So harming the environment affects this family.
Exactly, like a physical ailment. The extinction of a species is like a painful loss, a disfigurement within that family. It strongly emphasizes the inconsistency of being concerned about the environment, but indifferent to human suffering.
Everything is connected.
That's the fundamental principle. Genuine love for humanity must include love and care for the environment that sustains us all.
And then the discussion turns to the common destination of goods.
Highlighting the idea that the earth and its resources are basically a shared inheritance, and that private property is secondary to this universal purpose.
With global implications.
Absolutely. Demanding that the needs of the poor and marginalized must be given priority.
Finally, this chapter looks at the gaze of Jesus.
Yeah, noting his consistent emphasis on God as a loving father, and his tender care for all of creation, not just humans. Jesus himself lived in harmony with nature, often drawing lessons from it, inviting others to see divine messages in things.
His connection with nature, his own work as sanctification.
Exactly. And it highlights that the ultimate destiny of all creation is bound up with Christ, who was present from the beginning, is now risen, and ultimately leads to that state where God may be everything to everyone.
Okay. Chapter 3 then delves into the human roots of the ecological crisis.
Right. Asserting that our immense technological power has brought us to a critical turning point.
Or crossroad.
A crossroads, yeah. Acknowledging the benefits of advancements, but also warning of the huge risks when power isn't guided by wisdom and ethics.
And this chapter focuses on something called the globalization of the technocratic paradigm. What's that exactly?
Think of it as a dominant way of thinking that sees technology as the primary, maybe the only, solution to all our problems. It tends to view the world mechanistically, focusing on controlling and transforming nature as just an external object, often without considering its intrinsic value or the broader consequences.
For the environment or for people?
Exactly. It prioritizes efficiency and profit above almost everything else.
And this way of thinking permeates our economic and political systems.
That's the argument. Pushing aside concerns about human dignity, planetary health, and the increasing specialization within technology can make it hard to see the bigger picture, leading to a neglect of ethical considerations.
The text critiques this idea of infinite growth, doesn't it?
Strongly. The idea that natural resources are endless and tech can always fix any environmental problem, it argues that's a flawed assumption. Creating a truly sustainable ecological culture requires a fundamental shift away from this technocratic mindset.
Meeting new ways of thinking, different policies.
Education, spirituality, changes in lifestyle, the whole package.
But it's not all bleak. It offers some hope.
It does. It points to examples where technology is being used in healthier, more human-centered, sustainable ways, suggesting the possibility of a bold cultural revolution, one that encourages us to slow down, pay attention, see the world differently.
Okay. The discussion then shifts to the primacy of the human being.
Where the text rejects the idea of humans as just one species among many.
Why?
But it also cautions against a misguided anthropocentrism, putting humans at the center in the wrong way. It stresses that renewing our relationship with nature requires renewing humanity itself. Our connection to the environment is inseparable from our connections with each other and with God.
Then there's practical relativism.
Yeah, where a flawed view of human importance leads to prioritizing immediate convenience, short-term self-interest.
Which connects to environmental and social decay.
That's the logical link it draws. If nothing has inherent value beyond its immediate use to us, then exploitation becomes easy to justify.
The text also addresses the need to protect employment.
Right. Emphasizing the value of human labor within this integral ecology framework. Drawing from the creation account, monastic traditions, highlighting the spiritual significance of manual work and the importance of development that's prudent and respects creation.
Finally, this chapter looks at new biological technologies.
Acknowledging that human intervention in the plant and animal world for legitimate human needs is, well, permissible.
But with limits.
Exactly. Stressing the importance of moral boundaries, a religious respect for the integrity of creation, It calls for balance regarding scientific progress, appreciating the potential of genetics, molecular biology, but warning against indiscriminate genetic manipulation.
So interventions should support nature's development.
That's the suggestion. Aim to support nature's inherent development as intended by its creator, with careful consideration of the broader impacts, especially on small producers and ecosystems.
Right. Chapter 4 then takes us into the heart of integral ecology.
Yeah, emphasizing again that profound interconnectedness, the need for a comprehensive vision looking at all facets of the global crisis.
It starts with environmental, economic, and social ecology.
Highlighting how our natural and social systems are deeply intertwined, demanding integrated solutions, addressing poverty, restoring dignity, protecting the environment simultaneously. You can't separate them.
It underscores the role of researchers, academic freedom.
And the need to recognize the intrinsic value of ecosystems, not just their value to us, emphasizing that sustainable use has to consider the ability of these systems to regenerate. It calls for an economic ecology with a much broader perspective.
Integrating environmental protection into development itself.
Fully acknowledging the complex interplay between ecological health and social well-being.
Then cultural ecology is explored.
Highlighting threats to our historical, artistic, cultural heritage, and the crucial need to incorporate local history and culture into how we tackle environmental problems, stressing dialogue between scientific knowledge and local wisdom, respecting the rights and identities of different peoples.
Okay, then the ecology of daily life.
Emphasizing that real development has to consider the quality of human life in our everyday settings, because these settings profoundly influence how we think, feel, act.
So design matters.
Hugely. Designing spaces, understanding human psychology, fostering belonging by protecting common areas, urban landscapes.
And human ecology is linked to moral principles.
Yes, the idea of principles written into our nature. Pope Benedict's ecology of man, respecting our bodies as gifts, valuing complementary roles of men and women.
This chapter concludes with the principle of the common good.
Extending its reach to future generations. Emphasizing intergenerational solidarity as a matter of justice. It critiques a purely utilitarian view of the world, calls for renewed commitment to solidarity within our own generation, too.
Okay. Chapter 5 shifts focus to paths of dialogue and action, starting with dialogue on the environment in the international community.
Noting the growing global awareness planet as shared homeland, needing collective solutions, international agreements on sustainable agriculture, renewable energy transition.
But the need to move away from fossil fuels is stressed.
Urgently, along with the complex debate about who pays for this transition. The text acknowledges the often slow pace of political and business responses, but holds out hope for the 21st century to take responsibility.
It mentions some positive agreements.
It does, but also notes the limitations of non-binding ones. It delves into carbon credits, the priorities for poorer countries needing help to shift to cleaner energy. It emphasizes the need for enforceable international agreements, better governance of shared resources like oceans.
It highlights the link between inaction on climate and inaction on poverty.
Yes, arguing it's often the same mindset hindering both, calling for stronger international institutions with real enforcement power.
Then dialogue for new national and local policies.
Emphasizing the crucial role of individual nations, planning, regulating, enforcing their own environmental measures, the importance of law in setting clear boundaries, promoting best practices.
The text also explores the vital dialogue between science and religion.
Recognizing the unique contributions both can offer for integral ecology. Religion providing motivation, inspiring conversion, raising awareness. Science providing deeper understanding of the realities, calling for mutual respect, open communication.
Finally, politics and economy in dialogue for human fulfillment.
Asserting politics shouldn't be dictated solely by economics or technology. Urging dialogue that prioritizes human well-being. Questioning purely profit-driven models, calling for a fundamental redefinition of progress beyond just economic and technological growth.
Okay. Chapter 6 brings our deep dive to a close with ecological education and spirituality.
Right. Emphasizing the need for a cultural revolution to overcome consumerism. Education is key here, fostering ecological awareness, a broader understanding of life.
It starts with a call towards a new lifestyle.
Highlighting consumerism's powerful grip, the need to cultivate ethical and aesthetic values beyond just self-interest.
Then educating for the covenant between humanity and the environment.
Stressing the importance of translating awareness into daily habits, a big educational challenge in a consumer culture. highlighting the crucial role of the family in fostering integral ecological understanding, teaching respect, order, gratitude.
Ecological conversion is presented next.
As a necessary personal journey, recognizing mistakes, repenting, genuinely desiring change, but emphasizing individual efforts aren't enough. Community networks are needed too.
The chapter explores the joy and peace found in alternatives to consumerism.
Yeah, offered by various spiritual traditions. The principle of less is more, contentment in simplicity, gratitude, inner detachment. Connecting this inner peace with broader care for ecology and the common good.
Civic and political love is mentioned too.
Presented as naturally extending to care for the environment, part of living together in community. It also explores mystical dimensions in creation, the role of sacramental signs and the celebration of rest in connecting us to something larger, healing relationships.
The chapter concludes by looking at the Trinity and the relationship between creatures.
Suggesting the interconnectedness in creation reflects the divine's relational nature, inviting us towards a spirituality of global solidarity, highlighting Mary as Queen of all creation and St. Joseph's protective example as sources of inspiration.
And finally, the text looks beyond the sun.
To our ultimate encounter with infinite divine beauty, the hope of eternal life as shared awe, encouraging us to continue our journey through earth with joy and hopeful anticipation.
Wow. That has truly been a deep dive into an incredibly important body of work.
It really has.
For you, the learner, listening in, I think a central insight, maybe the central insight, is this fundamental call to reevaluate our relationship with the planet.
Absolutely. It's about moving away from that perspective of dominance, of exploitation, towards one of responsible stewardship, recognizing that all of creation has inherent value, not just what it provides for us.
Yeah, what really stayed with me was that early idea, the Earth being among the most mistreated of the poor. That's such a powerful framing. Or maybe that concept of ecological debt, the idea that wealthier nations owe this debt to poorer ones for the environmental damage caused.
Yeah.
A debt with real-world consequences.
It makes you think differently, doesn't
Well-
it? So, perhaps here's a thought for you to take away.
Okay.
How might consciously shifting your own perspective from seeing yourself as perhaps dominant over nature to being a responsible steward within it, how might that influence your daily choices, your actions, no matter how small they might seem?
That's a great question. Exactly.
Right.
We really encourage you to think more about these themes, see how they connect with your own life, your own interest. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.